Once again, welcome to Unlocking Psychological Safety, Essential Leadership Practices for Thriving Teams. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fernanda Correa. I'm Business Development Spring to Innovation, and I'll be helping out with the webinar today. We hope you get a lot of value of the session and enjoy the content, whether you are watching this live or on demand. In today's webinar, we hope you learn more about psychological safety, gauge your interest, and explore actionable strategies to create a safe and supportive environment where team members can ask questions openly, learn from mistakes without fear, and confidently take risks. To talk about psychological safety today, we have Michelle Schafer, a certified International Coach Federation professional coach and an integral professional coach specializing in leadership and career transitions. With over 25 years in human resources, learning and development, and community engagement, she has empowered professionals across sectors, including banking, municipal government, and not-for-profit, guiding them through meaningful career transformations. Her approach combines strategic insight with practical tools, creating pathways for clients to harness their unique skills and lead with clarity and confidence. Recognized as one of Ottawa's top coaches, she's also a sought-after speaker, author, and contributor to industry publications. In talking to Michelle, we'll have Nilofer Erdebil, our founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. She's a TEDx Ottawa speaker, author of the international best-selling book, Future Proofing by Design, and has dedicated her career to assisting organizations in achieving remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nilofer to start the conversation with Michelle.
Thank you so much, Fernanda, and welcome, Michelle. So happy to have you here talking.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
Excellent. And thank you for talking about psychological safety. And it's fascinating. We got some really great comments in our chat early on as we asked about what psychological safety is for people. And there's some really great comments in there.
Absolutely. I mean, when I'm looking through these comments, it's really clear to me that a number of you already have a certain level of understanding about psychological safety. So, and if I mispronounce somebody's name, please forgive me. I'm going to try my very best. But what I'm noticing in the chat is, Franz saying that, you feel heard when there's a level of psychological safety in the team. Absolutely. Monica feeling appreciated as a team member, feeling appreciated for, maybe even the ideas that you bring forward, for sure. Pauline, you're saying, to be safe to not just be yourself as your authentic self, but to be able to speak up, maybe even to bring some dissenting views forward. 100%. Serena, I love what you made, the connection that you made here, which is psychological safety and well-being are very much connected. It's not something that we oftentimes hear when we're talking about psychological safety, but absolutely, if there's a high level of safety in the team, you're going to feel, more not just secure as a team member, but you're going to feel better on so many levels. So I love that you made that connection. And seeing some familiar names on here as well. Mark, you asked a really great question. What would the answer be if you asked, is it safe to take a risk? If the answer is yes, then the level of psychological safety is high. But if the answer is no, well, that's indicative of so many other things that are really detrimental to teams. So there's a lot of people in the Nilofer that are already thinking that, they have a good understanding of psychological safety, which is so encouraging for the start of our conversation today.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And so you are our psychological safety expert on today. What is your definition of psychological safety?
So I will bring forward the definition that is, promoted mostly, and really I need to give credit to, I'm going to say, the inventor of psychological safety. So Amy Edmondson, she coined the term psychological safety years and years ago. And it was really just to describe what's happening in teams and what are ways that teams can operate more effectively, productively, and positively as a team. And so her definition is centered around it being a shared belief. It's not something that one leader in an organization believes, but it needs to be a shared belief around the team that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to express your ideas and any concerns or challenges that you have. It's okay to speak up with any questions, maybe even ask a challenging question, and to admit mistakes. But more importantly, to do all of those things without there being a fear of any kind of negative consequence, that people don't feel like they will be shamed or blamed or humiliated in the process. And that part is really key to the definition. Now we have a poll, a couple of polls actually. Now that we have like an idea of what the definition of psychological safety is, it's important to also look at what is psychological safety and what is it not. And so, Fernanda, I'm going to ask you to launch poll number 1 out of 3 that we have. We've got 3 successive ones. And the first one, actually, all 3 are up right here. So you can actually log your responses to all 3. The first question is, they're all true and false. Teams can get along well with each other and demonstrate a low level of psychological safety. True or false? You're only given one choice here. Question number 2, there's an absence of accountability in teams with high psychological safety. True or false? And then question number 3, teams with high psychological safety have low performance standards. Again, true or false? So I'll give you a moment just to log your responses. Very curious to see what comes up here.
Yeah, these are such great questions and super thought-provoking as well, too.
Yeah, we'll go through each one of them. I see that there are some individuals logging their response. So let's see here. Looks like we're pretty well there. Let's see. Okay, it looks like the vast majority of you have had a chance to log your responses. So let's go through this, each one of these one by one. So question number 1, teams can get along well with each other and yet still demonstrate a low level of psychological safety. The majority of you logged a true response. And that is the response for this particular question because, just because teams get along well, maybe they socialize together, they do all kinds of fun things in the office, they really enjoy each other's company, what might be absent from that team is because they just want to get along and they want everybody to be happy, that it's really hard to challenge each other. People in the team may feel that they can't do that because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. They don't want to challenge a particular perspective. They just want everybody to get along. So simply getting along together is not indicative of a high level of psychological safety. Those team members need to feel comfortable to ask those hard questions, to bring forward those, those different opinions that maybe are different from what everybody else is sharing. So, the vast majority of you are already onto that in terms of how psychological safety, can show up and what's important about it. Question number 2, there is an absence of accountability in teams with high psychological safety. Really encouraged to see that a lot of you responded false. And this is, I'm going to say, maybe a myth about psychological safety that, if we include everybody and, it's okay to make mistakes, that there's safety to do that, that means that there's no accountability, that people can just do whatever they want or they can get away with making mistakes and there's no addressing it or talking about it. And the opposite is true. So, psychological safety in teams means, yes, it's okay to make mistakes. Yes, it's okay to even have failures, but individuals are still going to be accountable for their contribution to that particular situation. But more importantly, it's not about pointing fingers or blaming an individual. It's about taking a step back and saying, wow, that happened. What are we going to learn from that? And that's what shows that psychological safety is there. That somebody isn't going to be humiliated because they made a mistake or something that they led, maybe a project didn't go according to plan, that you're going to learn from it. So accountability is still there, but the safety part is really important to recognize.
Can I ask you a question as
Yeah.
we're going through this and I'm seeing some of the results? It strikes me as interesting in terms of thinking about the team and the people on the team, because some people might think that it's highly psychological safe team and others might not, and then how a leader perceives it versus how the team perceives it as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's and you know, there's lots of different ways that we can, I'm going to say, assess psychological safety in teams so that we aren't making a subjective assumption about it. We are really looking at facts and observations. So, you know, there are ways to actually assess psychological safety. Like there are assessments that will allow leaders to assess psychological safety in teams. So that gives them some really good data to work with. But even just observing what happens in teams. So, for example, if a leader notices in their meetings that it's always the same people that put up their hand and bring an idea forward, or there's certain individuals in the room that seem to be louder than others and their ideas are consistently taken, that might be an indication that the level of psychological safety is low. It's an indicator. It doesn't mean anything, but combined with other observations, a leader can get a sense for what the level is like in their team. Similarly, if you know, if somebody brings an idea forward and consistently, you know, everybody says, "Oh yeah, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay." Well, there may be some groupthink at play. It may not necessarily mean that other people don't have other ideas. It just means that maybe they don't feel like it's an okay environment to bring that forward. So Neil, to your point, I mean, absolutely. Leaders can have a sense for what's happening. Team members can have a sense for what's happening. But until there is some open dialogue and really reflecting and observing, that's going to give you the data that will give you a strong indicator of whether psychological safety is high or maybe whether it's at a lower level.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a great question. Very interesting. Um, if we look at question number 3, so question number 3, teams with high psychological safety have low performance standards, really connected to number 2, actually. A vast majority of you said that that would be false, and that would be true. Teams with high psychological safety actually have high performance standards. Why is that? Because people feel safe to bring other ideas to the table. People feel safe to challenge or maybe debunk the way that things have been done up until that point, which means it's opening up the door for fresh perspectives, which means there's a possibility of doing things differently. Continuous improvement is a big part, observable part of teams with high psychological safety. And what that leads to is actually high performance standards. The team wants to do more. The team wants to look at other perspectives. The team wants to do some things differently, or at least look at ways to do things differently. Those things actually increase performance as opposed to taking it the other way. So really, really interesting perspectives that are already come out here.
Yeah,
Wow,
and
thank you very much, everybody, for answering.
we have a comment here too, is sometimes the lack of comfort with speaking up isn't necessarily from within the team, but might be management outside of the team that may be interested in hearing about the thoughts that don't align with their own thoughts and may react negatively as well too.
Yes, yeah, that's Dirk, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's oftentimes I'm going to say like a comment that I hear back from leaders who say, well, you know, like this all seems really great. I'm on board with creating, you know, a higher level of safety, but what if my leader isn't on board? What if, you know, higher up within the organization, the message is different than the one that I'm trying to create within my team? And that can be really hard, certainly, to work with, because you know what we're going to be talking about today is, you know, we can't change organizational culture. We can't change like decisions that are made from other individuals, either within the team or within the organization. We can only really look at our own contribution. So I'm going to invite all of you that if you see that around you, maybe, you know, embracing psychological safety is not as welcome in other areas of the organization, focus on what you can do with your own team. You can do some really positive things to move the needle on the psychological safety within your own team and have a lot of influence that may end up influencing other members of the organization. But even at the bare minimum, you're going to do your part to make it safe for people to speak up, bring their ideas forward, and you're going to model, what we're going to talk about today, which is, like ways to promote psychological safety just by your own approach as a leader. But it can really be hard, Dirk. I feel into your statement there, because it can be a big issue in organizations for sure.
Now, I know you touched on this slightly, but why is psychological safety so important in teams?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, there's so many benefits that, make having a high level of psychological safety important. And I'm going to wear my other hat for a moment. So, in the introduction, Fernanda shared, I'm a leadership coach. I'm also a career transition coach. And what I see time and time again, through the career transition clients that I have is that people leave leaders, oftentimes they don't leave jobs.
Yeah.
And what that means is that, as a leader, if you're able to create psychological safety for your teams, people are, they're going to feel more engaged. They're going to feel like their perspectives are welcome, their ideas are welcome. I think it was maybe France very early on in the chat says, like, you feel appreciated. And, when you feel appreciated, you want to contribute to your team and you feel like your ideas matter. You feel like you're being heard and that you're being understood and that there's value in your contributions. So, even just those reasons, increasing, the ability for team members to feel appreciated, it's going to help them feel more engaged. You're going to see their participation in meetings. That's really important to have that level of safety in the team. It also leads to better decision making because when one person's perspective is always the one that's taken, or there's one individual who is making the decisions all the time, then what that closes the door on is other ideas. And those other ideas might actually result in a better decision. But if there's no, bandwidth to hear what those other ideas are, then it makes it hard, obviously, for people to be able to bring them forward. So psychological safety leads to, higher creativity because people are feeling it's okay to bring their ideas forward, leading to different approaches, better decision making, higher engagement, better well-being. I can't remember now who cited that initially in the chat, but that's, being able to contribute in a positive way to the mental health of team members. Psychological safety provides the gateway for all those things. So, when we hear why it's a benefit, it's almost, it makes it harder to argue against it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think even before the term psychological safety came out, I think some of us realized that we were not in particularly safe environments, and other times we realized how safe an environment we were in. I know I've actually stayed in positions a lot longer because I felt that psychological safety with my boss within the team, and that I could bring up anything, share any ideas that came to my mind, and we could have a conversation about it and know that it wasn't going to be dismissed. And I didn't feel like anybody was going to say, well, that's a stupid idea. And so it's really fascinating how much of an impact it has on not just the engagement, but also how long people stay within certain teams and groups. And for me, I've actually worked in at least one company where the whole company, it felt like there was a lot of psychological safety. And that was over 20 years ago. And I still see people that worked together in other companies working together because that bond was so strong amongst them, which is so lovely to see.
It is, and your reflection on your past experience also hits the point home that when there is a high level of psychological safety, it affects people for years to come. And when that psychological safety is low, it affects people for years to come. So, one question I get from leaders is, well, I don't have time to do this. I've already got, all of these things I need to do to, lead the team and, make certain decisions and, oversee projects and all of those things. Well, I don't have time for this thing called psychological safety. There's a couple of things I want to offer if you're thinking about that, which is, one, we're calling all of this, promoting psychological safety, which it is. But at the end of the day, what we're going to talk about today is just it's leadership. It's leadership approaches and principles that are key for leadership today. And these are things that employees and team members are needing from leaders. So I mean, that's something really important to think about. The other thing to, if you're thinking, I don't have time to do this, is all of the individual, like actionable moves that we're going to talk about today are ways, like they're quick ways of being able to lay the foundation where it is safe for people to speak up and make mistakes. It doesn't take much time to do any of the things that we're going to talk about later today. But let's say you don't do those things. Now it's going to take a longer time to maybe clean up the mess that happens when you react in a really defensive way to a team member, or the trust that's fractured as a result of your approach and your actions. It takes a long, long time to rebuild that trust. So if you think you don't have time for some of these, think about what would happen if psychological safety wasn't there. You actually have to work much, much harder to rebuild that trust within a team than it would take to do any of the things we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. And so this brings up the next question. How do we do psychological safety?
Yes. So psychological safety doesn't just develop on its own. And it doesn't happen overnight as well. So, what we are really doing, if we're committing to elevating the level of safety within our teams, then we are committing to a series of actions and behaviors that are intentional. So that means that we're going to make a conscious effort to, for example, say to a team, what am I missing here? What other viewpoints do we need to gather? Like, I'm giving you an actionable thing even just right now. Asking that question doesn't take much time, but it's something we have to intentionally do. So what some leaders find helpful is like, to have a little, like a list of, here are things that I am going to do in my next team meeting. Here are things that I'm going to do in my next one-on-one or bilat with a team member. And the more that we commit and are intentional, and we commit to doing these things consistently, because of course, psychological safety doesn't develop overnight, like I mentioned, then we can slowly start to move the needle on elevating that level of safety within the team. And the best way to know that you are moving the needle is just to pay attention to what's happening. Try something new and just observe what happens when you do. So, it's a series of actions, it's behaviors, it's also what we say and how we say it that contributes to building that safety, but it really needs to be intentional. It's not a, let's wing it kind of approach.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind talking about some of those actions. And then also for leaders that are busy these days, how can we ask them what's one thing that they could do to increase that psychological safety in their teams?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, when we think back to the two core elements of psychological safety, I mean, one is that people feel safe to be able to contribute ideas, possibly even, conflicting ideas to what's already been brought up. And the other element is making it a safe environment to make mistakes or, even have failures, like when you try new things. So a couple of things that you can do, and I'm going to kind of couch this by saying any one of these things may sound simplistic in nature, but I'm going to recognize for all of us, we're human. None of these things in isolation are actually easy because we're hardwired. Like we've already been used to a certain way of leading our teams, being used to a certain way of approaching things. So any of these things does require that conscious intentionality to try. So one of them I mentioned earlier, which is, as a leader, saying, what am I missing? What other perspectives are there? What else do we need to consider before we move forward on this particular, project or initiative? That's one way of increasing psychological safety, is even just by asking that question. Another way of doing it is when you're in like a discussion, maybe it's a team meeting, and there's ideas that are coming to the table, especially if you're noticing that nobody is challenging the ideas up until this point. Ask for it. Ask and say, let's like hear some dissent here. Let's hear some opposite views. What are some other things that we need to consider that may be different than all of these ideas? So when we ask for the challenge, it's going to make it safe for people. You're actually putting it on the table that you want them to do this. Another thing that is really actionable, and this one is hard, and I'm a coach, and I find this one hard, which is to be mindful when your emotions are rising.
Yeah.
So what that means is we might be triggered. I know you're laughing and nodding your head. I know I've been caught by this. I get caught by this with my own kids. I've got 2 teenage boys. There's hot buttons in the house all the time with them. But the key here is to recognize, what are those triggers? What are the times, the situations, maybe it's the conversations that are like hot buttons for us, where when we're in that situation, or when somebody maybe asks us a certain question or challenges us, when we start to become open to new perspectives, we're going to be open to the challenges. You might feel that you're triggered by the challenges. The key here is to be mindful, pay attention to what's happening in your body, and then take a pause. And the pause can be as simple as take a sip of water or coffee or tea or whatever you have there. I watched a video a little while ago, and it was Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs was in, this is obviously like many, many years ago. He was in, I think it was a shareholder meeting. And somebody asked him a really hard question, like really, really challenged him. Basically said in the shareholder meeting, like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're doing. And he could have responded in a very defensive way, but he didn't. He did this. That's really interesting. Took a sip of water, which just slowed down his response. So when we slow down our response, it gives us a chance to really respond versus react. And sometimes when we react, it can be very harsh. When we react in a blunt, harsh, direct way, it automatically makes it unsafe for people to bring their ideas forward. So that's another actionable way. Or even just saying, like, what can we learn from this? Okay, this happened. This did not go according to plan. Let's take a look at, what are we going to learn from this? What can we do differently next time? And leaders have such, I mean, all leaders, or even just, project leads, not even people leaders, but, project leads as well, who are leading through influence with groups. Everybody has an opportunity to use these techniques. Even in volunteer committees that you're part of, you can use these techniques as a way of increasing safety. So, small moves that lead to big impact.
I love it. And I liked your input on being able to use it at home and even with kids or significant others, all sorts of families. I know you have a fabulous presentation for us as well, too. And I love chatting. I love hearing your thoughts. Time's flying by. So do you want to start in on the presentation too?
Sounds great. And just looking at the chat, I don't see anything else coming forward. So we'll keep an eye on the chat as we continue. So I'm just going to share my screen. I think everybody can see my screen here. Yes? Thumbs up? Perfect. Okay. So you're all in for a treat, because I'm going to give you a taste of a workshop that Spring to Innovation is really making available to all of you in the new year, which is a psychological safety workshop that is based on a book. And the book that you see in the screen here is called Psychological Safety Playbook: Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. So this book was authored by Carolyn Helbig and Minette Norman. And I had the opportunity towards the end of the summer to participate in a certification program to lead a workshop based on their book. This is a book that I'm going to highly recommend that all of you pick up. It is such an easy read. And in it are basically 5 plays, hence the name of playbook, 5 plays, which are really major ways to create psychological safety. And within each of those 5 plays, there are 5 individual actionable moves to actually allow you to what I'm going to call operationalize psychological safety, like actually do psychological safety. So this was the very first cohort to facilitate this workshop, to be certified with this material. And I was part of the first cohort. I was the only Canadian. This was an international group. There were only 11 of us worldwide. It was made available to a very, very small number of people. I jumped on it because I'm a huge supporter of the learnings from this book, and really encourage you to pick it up. So I'm going to give you a bit of a taste today. I'm going to say like an appetizer of what the full workshop can be. So the full workshop is 2 hours. That's what you're going to see on the Spring to Innovation calendar for the new year. But I'm just going to focus in on one specific aspect of the workshop. So just to kind of lay the groundwork, there are 5 plays that are covered off in the whole book. And in the workshop, obviously, in 2 hours, you're not going to come away with all 25 actionable ways. But what the workshop will offer is, you to learn about and try and commit to trying one individual actionable move from each of the 5 plays. So I just want to give you an idea of what those 5 like major themes are. These are ways that you can increase the level of psychological safety in your team. So, play number 1 is all about communicating courageously. I'm not talking about, courage, be a superhero. That's not what it is at all. But it's really just about being like having the courage to be vulnerable, to try something new, even when you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So, ways to do that are by welcoming other viewpoints, like I mentioned before, asking, what am I missing? It's about soliciting those diverse perspectives, like, let's hear some of those challenging ideas. And this one is really interesting because it challenges the traditional model of leadership, which is taking off the mask of perfection. So I say challenging the traditional notion of leadership, because oftentimes we think a leader has to know it all. They are making all the decisions. They have to have the right answer all the time. Well, guess what? As leaders, we're all human. So by showing vulnerability, we're actually saying, that's a great question. I don't know that yet, but let me come back to you with an answer. So that's play number 1. Play number 2, and this is where I'm going to give you a taste actually of play number 2 today, is all about mastering the art of listening. So this is talking about being fully present and focusing on the individual, not on all of our distractions. In the course of a busy day, we have lots of distractions. And really, committing to not formulating our response while somebody is talking, but really dialing into what's important to them. That's play number 2. Play number 3 is what I mentioned, very recently here. Managing your emotions and recognizing times where you get triggered, being aware of what those hot points are, and developing new approaches to manage your reactions, even just by pausing and taking a breath or taking a sip of water. When you slow down your body, you slow down your mind, and you slow down your response. So even just that act of taking the sip of water, like what you saw how long it took me to do that. What was that? Like, I didn't time it, but maybe it was 3 seconds, like if that. that is the make or break point between responding in a very quick way, in which case you might say something that you'd rather not say, and just responding in a more thoughtful way. That's play number 3. Play number 4 is all about embracing risk and failure. So we're not talking about letting all the mistakes go, not keeping people accountable, kind of back to that poll that we talked about before, but it's just about creating a culture and an environment where even just simply by saying, we're going to try something new as a team and we're going to make mistakes. And that's okay because we're going to learn about those things together. When you say that, you're just laying the foundation. And play number 4 is actually a lot about, I'm going to say, like embracing the approach of a scientist. So think about, our top research scientists in Canada or the US and the breakthroughs that they're behind. Guess what? As a scientist and a researcher, there are tons of mistakes that are made. So embracing the fact that there are going to be mistakes and that's okay. And number 5 is all about inclusivity. And by designing inclusive rituals, one of the things that we talk about in the full 2-hour workshop is creating rituals that even go back to the regular gatherings that you have with people, meetings. I can't even remember what the stat was. Oh my gosh, it was like something I read recently that showed we are in meetings, I think it was like 80% of the day. I mean, you probably would all agree with that. That's a lot of time in meetings. And what sometimes often happens in meetings is that the space is not provided to allow everybody to be heard. So play number 5 in the bigger workshop actually focuses in on designating a team member, and this is a rotating role, that is responsible for making sure that everybody gets heard, making sure that there are no interruptions as well, that everybody has the full chance to be able to share what's on their mind. But then also that one person can't speak twice until everybody speaks once. And just, creating that as a way of conducting meetings is just a way of promoting psychological safety because now everybody gets heard as opposed to the few, more participatory people in the room. We talk about like ways to do that. So, that gives you a bit of a taste of what the whole workshop will cover. Again, like one specific actionable move from each of those 5. The book covers all 25. I'm going to share with you just a little bit to give you an idea of what you could expect from play number 2. So play number 2 is all about, creating, a more effective way of listening to individuals, mastering the art of listening, as you will. So this actionable move really just focuses in on the commitment to listening to understand, which means that we're not going to formulate a response while somebody is talking. And, if we think about the power of listening, I mean, listening is actually a leadership superpower. And it's simultaneously one of the more underdeveloped leadership skills. Some of you might be surprised by that. I know I was when I first heard that because I thought, wow, that's really important to really shine the spotlight of the importance of listening effectively. As humans, we think that we are great listeners and we think that we don't allow things to get in our way. But, the reality is, there might be people coming in and out of your office, our phones. Oh, they're like, give us notifications all the time. We can get very distracted by that. But we also get in our heads. And when somebody is talking, we want to have a response. So instead of fully listening to what that person is saying, we're already formulating the response before they're even done, which guess what? Means we're really not that effective on listening in the first place. So when we commit to listening more effectively, it's a game changer. I remember one of my leadership clients from a few years ago sharing that when she had one-on-ones with her leader, so she was having those meetings on a biweekly basis, her leader was answering emails while they were talking. She would take phone calls while they were talking. Well, what kind of message was that sending to this individual? that her perspective wasn't valued, her time wasn't even valued, that the leader's time and the leader's ideas were more important. So, you can kind of think to yourself even now, what would be, like a leader that you worked with over the years who was an amazing listener. Think about what that person did, actionable things that they did to help you feel heard and understood. You can also think about leaders that you've had in the past, kind of like my leadership client, where that leader that you had in the past was not a good listener. What were the things that that individual did? Well, those are the things obviously we want to stay away from as a way of listening more effectively. So you might be wondering, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I listen to understand without formulating responses? So, the first thing that we can look at doing, and I love the graphics. These graphics are directly from the actual book, the Psychological Safety Playbook. They are simple, like sketches that are so impactful. I mean, look at what's on the screen here. One person, they're looking at the exact same thing, but because they're looking at it from different perspectives, one says, that's a 6. The other person says, that's a 9. They're both right. But unless they have a dialogue to understand each other's perspective, they're just going to be like immersed in their own perspective and not be open to other things. So here's some ways that we can, actually demonstrate to team members that we are listening to understand. So, the first thing is that just, committing to fully understanding, like commit to it. Own it, be intentional about it. Have a sticky note that maybe especially if you do a lot of virtual meetings, have a sticky note on your wall or your computer with the question, what am I missing? And that's a way that you're committing to fully understanding. You are, widening your perspective there. Another way that we can listen to understand is to ask questions. Like, put on your curiosity hat. Again, we're challenging the traditional notions of leadership that leaders have to have all the answers. Leaders know everything. Well, that's not the case. And again, we're human, right? So ask team members, help me understand, help me understand the other perspectives you took into view before making this decision. Help me understand what will happen when we implement this particular initiative. Ask those questions to gather information, and that's going to demonstrate to the other person that not only do you care, but that you want to take the time to really fully understand. There might be things that your team member shares with you that you haven't considered before, and that could be a game changer for the direction in which your team goes. The next thing, give your full attention to your conversation partner. So whoever it is that you're talking about, it could be a team member, it could be a peer, it could be your own leader. Any of those individuals, just commit to giving them full attention. So, if you have an office door and you're meeting a person, like close your door, turn off the notifications on your phone, maybe even close down your computer, unless it's a virtual meeting, of course. Remove those distractions so that it will just make it so much easier for you to focus on the other person. And the last one is really, really hard because, again, traditional view of leadership. People are coming to a meeting. They want to hear from the leader. They want the leader to say, what their perspective is, what their idea is, what their decision is. So try something new. Instead of being the first one to talk, try being the last one to talk and allow everybody else to share their ideas, their perspective, and bring forward any questions that they have. That way you can resist sharing your perspective too early, because usually people kind of look to the leader. So try something new. In order to increase the level of safety in our teams, it's about, doing something different. And so these are all very actionable ways to make that happen. So, we've talked about ways that we can listen more effectively. Well, I want to end this section by asking 2 questions of you. And this is where I'm going to encourage you to get active in the chat right now, which is knowing that we're human and knowing that in the course of very busy days, we have lots of things that make it hard for us to stay focused. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what are some things that make it hard for you, challenging for you to stay focused on listening? I'd like you to contribute. I'd like to hear what some of your ideas are. Because when we acknowledge what those roadblocks are, then we can talk about, ways that we can combat those. So let's see what we've got here. Whoops. Now I can't see the chat now that I'm sharing my screen. So maybe you can share for me.
Yeah. So right now we've got one comment in here that meetings are too short and agendas too full.
Yeah, Heather, I'm seeing it now. Actually, it just popped up. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a huge barrier. What are some other things that get in the way?
There's a comment in here.
Yeah, wanting to have an intelligent, useful response. It takes time to build it in your head. So you start while individuals are talking. Absolutely. It's such a human response for sure. Yeah, big challenge. Anybody else? Arriving prepared to contribute rather than arriving with a beginner's mindset. Yeah, and that can be a challenge if you don't know, especially what you need to contribute. This is where agendas before meetings can be really helpful to allow people to kind of formulate those thoughts in advance. Neil, I'm going to ask you, what are some things that get in your way when you're listening? I'm curious.
I think for me, it's just a lot of the messages and emails coming through. I think sometimes that makes it harder, but I think when we're chatting with clients or we're doing training, it's putting the phones away, putting them on silent really helps out.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's fascinating as you were going through the four things that we could be doing. I think, can you go back one slide, Michelle? There was one point in there that was really interesting. Get curious and ask clarifying questions and commit to fully understanding. I think those two skills combined are really invaluable when also talking to leaders or senior executives.
Yeah.
You're able
Absolutely.
to, fully understand what's really important to them and be able to tie what you're doing to what's really important to them, ask those questions and get curious and really get to know them better. I find that that's when projects are more likely to be moved forward and
sure.
to get the funding that they need. I know we have about 9 minutes left.
Yeah.
There's some questions in the Q&A. And
That's great. Yeah, because maybe I'll just kind of wrap up this piece, which is and then we'll get to all the questions because I'd like to hear from them. And we're hearing already about ways that you can listen with your intention. And Neil, you just shared some right now, putting the phone away or like kind of putting those notifications off, asking those questions. I oftentimes get asked, well, how can I ask questions in a way that doesn't sound like I'm interrogating, and when we use, it's all about the language, right? So when we say, help me better understand X, Y, or Z, that's a way more softer approach than, kind of demanding information. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know for me, like one of the things that helps me listen with all of my intention is to turn off everything, like all of my like open tabs that especially are going to send me notifications, there's going to be dinging. Turning those off just allow you to really dial into what the other person is saying. So, with that, we're going to get to questions right now, but I want you to think, and maybe you can even drop in the chat as we're addressing some questions. Think about one thing that you're taking away from today that you personally are going to commit to trying out over the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks. Drop that in the chat as we're talking about the questions and answers, and would love to hear from you from that perspective.
Yeah, and as you guys are writing in the chat, just wanted to let you know that the session is being recorded and will be shared with you in the next week or two. And so you can watch it all over again at your leisure.
Wonderful. That's terrific. So let's go through the questions in the Q&A. And Neil or Fernando, maybe you can share those with me. I can't see.
Sure, yeah. Let me share them with you.
There we go.
So What do you think about anonymous questions after meetings?
Anonymous questions after meetings. So like France, I see that you brought that forward. Is it like where you like kind of taking things offline? Is that what you're referring to? Like as opposed to addressing something in the meeting, asking the question afterwards? I just want to make sure that that's what you were thinking of for that question.
Yeah, feel free to write in the chat for if you wanted to have that question clarified. I think when I look at that, and I think, what do you think about anonymous questions after the meetings? If you have anonymous questions after the meeting, does that mean that it doesn't feel like a psychologically safe environment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean that would be an indicator, and it could be a really interesting conversation to be had with the individual who had the question, to talk about, what stood in their way of asking that question in the meeting, because it may not necessarily be that they don't feel safe, but maybe they were just unsure of how to ask it. And so that's where, as a leader, leaders are coaches. So it could be a really great opportunity to coach that individual about, in the future, when you have a question, here's how you can bring that forward in a way that then we can all talk about it and have some conversation. But if what the individual shares is, like I felt like people would look down on me, or that it wouldn't be a good question to ask, then that is an indicator that more work needs to be done to increase the level of safety in teams.
Fantastic.
Great question.
And I think that might be all the time that we have for questions today. As Fernanda mentioned earlier, we do have a workshop coming up in January on psychological safety. And if you want, we can also do customized training for your teams as well, too, so that if you have a need immediately or in the near future, we can definitely do it for your team with the challenges that are appearing in your team as well. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Fernanda to close us off. Oh, thanks. So starting January 21st, if you want to use the QR code that we have to learn more about the psychological safety workshop, Essential Leadership Practices for Thriving Teams, you can do so. And Fernanda, if you want to take over and wrap up things, I want to take this time to thank Michelle for being on the webinar and sharing your experience and your expertise. I love the perspective on it, and super happy that we have an expert in Canada that can deliver this right now, right away to teams that need it. And it's always such a pleasure chatting with you and sharing experiences and hearing about your perspective.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for your comments, your perspectives, and your questions. And I look forward to perhaps seeing a number of you in the workshop that's going to be launched next year.
Yeah, and if you guys want to learn more about psychological safety, webinars coming up, have questions or comments, we also have a LinkedIn group that you can join. And we have a lot of information on our YouTube channel, including past webinars, steps of design thinking. We also do consulting, coaching, and training. And so the Deeper Clarity Network on LinkedIn, you can use this QR code or reach out to us if you have any additional questions on info at Spring to Innovation or on the website. And Fernando, could you go back to the previous slide too? Is if you are interested in other training that's going to be happening, we have Design Thinking Level 1 coming up November 19th, the certification December 19th, and Strategic Problem Solving, which is new for us. So anytime you want to know more about the courses, you can feel free to check out our website. And our most imminent one is Enhancing Employee Experience through Design Thinking and Deeper Clarity, November 7th. And for those that want to find out more about Spring to Innovation or about how human-centered design and design thinking works, we do have a book that was published last year called Future Proofing by Design. And that could be purchased at Amazon, Amazon Kindle, Municipal World, Indigo, Barnes and Noble. And If you have any thoughts on other webinars that you'd want to see, please let us know. Super happy to hear your thoughts. After this session, we will have a quick survey for you. So if you could spend some time to fill it out, it's really quick. It helps us create better experiences for our audience. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Osa. And hope everybody has a fantastic day.